So I'll let you know real quick that this might be a little shorter sermon, unless I just decide to ramble. God leads me down a rabbit trail. But if it does end up a little short, I may open up the floor. I know there are a couple of testimonies of people that have something good to share if they decide to share it, or just part of the struggle of life. It doesn't always mean it has to be good news, but I might do that. And so if you decide to share, that'll be up to you, and we'll see how the Spirit leads us here. So what was your favorite childhood board game when you were really little? Stratego. Well, I was not quite smart enough for Stratego when I was really little, but you probably were. I remember games like Go to the Head of the Class, Hi-Ho Cheerio, but my personal favorite, which is still being loved by kids today, is Chutes and Ladders. What I like about that game is you don't have to be smart. You don't have to answer any questions or make any real effort besides rolling the dice. I think, if I remember, I didn't own this game, but I think Go to the Head of the Class, you had to answer questions. Does anybody verify that? And so you had to have some knowledge there. So, I would prefer, if I was on a game show, to play like Deal or No Deal. Maybe even Wheel of Fortune. I would not want to go on Jeopardy! I would not want to go on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And don't even get me started on other contest type stuff like American Ninja Warrior. Have you seen that one? Or of course, Survivor. Yeah, I'd be out just like that. Now, Justin Shoemaker, you might be able to do Survivor after just doing that triathlon or whatever it was the other day. But I could not. I think most of us would say that games or contests that involve effort and knowledge are more like the Christian growth than random chance, hope to grow games. And I wouldn't disagree totally with that. The Bible says we reap what we sow. So in some sense of the word, we do have to put forth effort, use skill, have knowledge. But I think also most church people, even if they've been going to church most of their lives, would say that they don't really have very much skill or knowledge or effort when it comes to their spiritual development. Most people in church see the spiritual disciplines maybe as a ladder that they climb up as they grow and mature in their relationship with the Lord. Biblically, we think of Jacob's ladder, right? Did you grow up singing about Jacob's ladder? I did. Every round goes higher, higher. Soldiers of the cross. So if I were to give the average person in church a quiz anonymously and ask them, where do you think you're on the ladder in Christian growth? I'm guessing most people would say, well, say if it was an 8-rung ladder, I'm probably at 1, 2, or 3. Which is kind of discouraging, but also understandable. I don't know if it's more discouraging because most of us aren't very far, or maybe it's discouraging because we just evaluate ourselves so poorly. Maybe there are some reasons for both. But maybe the whole problem with that evaluation is that we're into the wrong mentality. We have the wrong mentality when it comes to Christian growth. So first, let me say our life is not a game. It's not playing chutes and ladders. We come together every week in this crazy world. Some weeks go well. Other weeks bring us to our knees. We come to church hoping to find some good news, some encouraging words, something to help us in our journey. Me too. But as we turn to God, we often see our journey as something we have failed at. We seem to think that we are stuck on the bottom rungs of the ladder, never to get very far up. We say to ourselves, maybe, I should be better, I should be farther along than I am. I should be able to rise above my circumstances better than I do. Because certainly if I was closer to God, things would go better. Or at least I would be stronger and they wouldn't bother me so much. Maybe there's some truth there. But it's probably wrapped up in a bunch of lies. And that's what I want to try to separate for us a little bit today. When we think about disciplines, we've got some of the right mentality. And then we've got some stuff that's a little out of whack. Besides, this series is called Rhythms of Grace. And if we come to God in grace, and we are saved by grace, is there not room for grace in our spiritual growth? You would hope so. Last week we talked about how we should respond to God's continual love letter to us. This week I want to talk about how we begin to grow in grace and knowledge. So let me lay out a typical 5-step program, and I just quickly made these up. I didn't bring them from a book or anything. They're very basic things. We're going to list all 5. And then we're going to talk about each one. Go ahead and flip to that slide. Here we go. Number 1, to initiate or begin the discipline. Then to connect with God. Number 3, improve and enlarge our time with God. Number 4, obey God and get better at what He calls us to do. And number 5, make a big impact on the world around us. Seems very basic, seems very simple. And I don't want to deny that there's truth to some of this. It might serve you well to a degree. But again, there are lies wrapped up here, as well as truths. And as Christians, we've got to know the difference. I began to look at these and I began to ask, how much of this is on me? And how much of that is just on God? Now, I realize it's hard to separate the two. God and us are in this kind of dance, and we can't really do anything without Him at all. The Bible makes it very clear that we are dependent on Him for even the most simple things. And yet, as good Wesleyans, we believe in free will, we believe in choices, a human responsibility. So where is the line here between what God does and what we do? And I'm going to separate these as we go along. Now, number 1, initiate or begin the discipline. You know what? Contrary to what we might think, it is God who initiates, not us. He does the first step. God is the pursuer in the relationship. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin. In the same way, I tell you, there's rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." Before we even knew Christ, he put himself on the cross to die for us. It is God who begins, who starts us, who says, "I am here." We may not always see that. We may not always feel that. But when we turn to God, we are reacting to God reaching us. So the first step is God's. The first step is God's. Now, sometimes God's voice comes in a whisper. So sometimes we don't sense that or hear that or feel that because we are so busy doing and watching and listening and talking. But when you start to sense that God is the initiator, it feels right. It feels good. Number 2 is connect with God. So this is what I put down as mainly our responsibility. We respond then to God's initiation. We decide if we're going to stop and connect, whether it's 5 minutes or 55 minutes or 5 seconds. So when God initiates with us, it's like he's holding out his arms to hug us. And then we decide, will I hug him back? Will I embrace? That is up to us. That is our choice. Now, I know that there are people who are huggers and there are people who are non-huggers. And I'm not trying to say you should hug the non-huggers, because you probably shouldn't. But what I am saying is everybody deep down, in some way or another, wants that hug. But he allows us to choose. Will we respond when his arms are open wide? So number 2 is on us. Number 3, to improve and enlarge our time with God. Again, while this is a tough one to separate, I'm going to try to do it. Words like improve and enlarge are tricky, if not dangerous, when it comes to time with God. Most of that type of thinking flows into this legalistic, religious mindset. I don't think we should even think about rungs on the ladder, because often we put ourselves on a rung on the ladder because we are this rung. Say, okay, I might think I'm in rung number 2 because probably these guys are not as good as I am, and these guys are definitely better. Right? So we compare in our human mentality. And whenever the disciples did that with Jesus, Jesus would just shake his head and be like, oh. They would say things like, "Jesus, when you get into your kingdom, can I sit on your right side, your left side? Can I be the one right next to you?" And Jesus is just going, "Just be happy you're there." Growing in grace is not something that can be measured. The disciples, again, they got fumbled up in that. Effort is important. I'm not saying effort is not, but it can be misconstrued. It can be interpreted badly. The goal is to relax and rest in him. That is so much of what devotion is with God. The goal is to trust in him and not in ourselves. And so often our mentality is to not trust in him. So it takes that. So really, number 3, I'm going to say it's God's responsibility. Because we shouldn't really be about enlarging. If you grow from having 5 minutes of time with God to 55 minutes of time, that's just because God is growing you in that relationship. You can't say how much you're growing as a person. You can't say that you're ready to go out and face Satan on the enemy lines. You don't know. You don't know. God decides. God decides. And he starts to decide how much you can do and how much you are ready for the next step. We don't devote to impress him. We don't devote to impress ourselves. We don't devote to impress anyone else. We don't need more time with God. We need more of God. And if that involves time, so be it. We just want more of God. And God wants more of us. Number 4, obey God and get better at what he calls you to do. I'm going to say that step 4 is our response to that time with God. It is God who grows us in that time, and it is our decision to decide what to do with that time. We always have a choice whether to obey or not to obey. And if we obey, God will grow us and guide our steps. But it is up to us to decide, are we going to respond? And if we do, he's going to give us more responsibility in the future. He's going to do more to spread the light that he gives us. And while that sometimes means more responsibility, it also means God's giving us more light and that we're shining brighter than ever. I love this scripture in Philippians where it says, "Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky as you hold firmly to the word of life." You're shining because you're holding. We get that messed up, and we want to shine without holding. And we stop shining, and we think we're still shining, and we're not. Certainly, we start to take risks. We start to put ourselves out there for God. We do this kind of trust fall with God. God, you got me? You got me, God? Yeah, I got you. Let me give you the 5th step here, which I find is the toughest one for me as I've journeyed as both a Christian and as a pastor. Make a big impact on the world around you. See, when you come to Jesus and you start following in his steps, you want to make an impact. We'd all like to decide for ourselves how big that impact is and in what way we make that impact. I want to make an impact here, and I want it to be great. I tell you, even as Christians, even as a pastor, yes, you say you want to do this great thing in building the kingdom. And I believe some of those motives are good, but some of them are not. Because some of our logic for building the kingdom is still about ourselves. And I can claim that myself. Sometimes I wish there were 3,000 people here. And part of that reason would be good, and maybe part of it would not be. We don't get to decide the fruit. How much fruit? What kind of fruit? I was reading in Jeremiah the other day. God told Jeremiah to preach his word to the Israelites whether they listened to him or not. Wow. I don't really want to preach to anybody that doesn't really want to listen. But he told Jeremiah to preach. We don't get to decide. I've worked with volunteers over the years, and they totally understand. Again, the same thing as a pastor. I just admitted that about the 2,000 people. We have the same problem. And volunteers have the same problem because they think their ministry is the ministry in the church. And I get it. That's what they're passionate about. That's what God has equipped them to be passionate about. And all that is right and good. And some of those motives are right. And some of them are not. Because when their ministry thrives, and when their ministry is going great, then they can say, I'm moving up the ladder. I'm going to another rung with Jesus. It is so easy to do. It is so easy to do. So as I've gone through these, and I realize some of these I'm splitting hairs, but the point I'm trying to make is to you, did you keep track of how many were ours and how many were God's? Who has more? Who has more responsibility? God does. God is committed to your growth. Especially as a Christian, God is committed to making you grow. Doesn't mean everything in your life is necessarily God ordained, but God's going to use it. Take the weight off your shoulders for a second, folks. God's got the majority of the responsibility in making you grow. And he is committed to it. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. Let me go back to chutes and ladders for a second. Even if you keep landing on chutes rather than ladders, it can make you feel like you're losing ground. Have no fear. God provides the ladders in his time. Or maybe I should say it differently. God's version of chutes and ladders means the chutes become the ladders. They take you down, and then if you trust God and lean on God, they take you back up. God will redeem it. Beauty from ashes. To bestow on them a crown of beauty instead of ashes, that all of joy instead of mourning, and a garment of praise. My friends, as you turn to God in your disciplines, you have a responsibility. You have your part in the relationship. But don't take more on yourself that's really meant for God. Don't worry about your rungs. Don't think of it in rungs. Don't beat yourself up continually for what you haven't attained or how weak you still are. I am still plenty. I didn't have a bad week. I had a hard week. And I feel it. Doesn't mean that I don't think that was a bad thing that I had a hard week. or a bad week, not a hard week. It's actually good. The chute becomes the ladder. And I fall into my Father's arms as a weak little kid and said, boy, I'm weak. Boy, I sure can't take much. Boy, my body wears down so quickly and my emotions start to get the best of me. God said, yeah, I know. I know. It's okay. I'm ready to hug you. I'm ready to hold you. Let's just be together. I'll light your path. I'll get you through this. That is the Christian discipline that we want, that we need to embrace. Stop this striving. Stop this checking off boxes. Stop this list of things that you should be doing that you're not. Stop it. It's not what he's about. It's not what he's calling you to. Though I have rambled, and I have chosen to ramble, I would like to see if one or two people have something they to share. Certainly wouldn't want you to, just be wise in your wisdom as God leads you to how much time you want to take. But if anybody has a quick response, either to the sermon or just, I know there's a couple things that happened this week to a couple people.